Ankita Bhandari dreamed of a better life, but Viraj Sen's glittering resort became her prison. Mehul Vardhan's cold silence watched her every move, while Rivan Daster's shadowy visit sealed her fate. Only Tara Elric saw the storm approaching, but by the time the truth surfaced, Ankita's courage had already cost her everything. Ankita Bhandari had always been the kind of girl who dreamed bigger than her surroundings. She grew up in a small town where the mountains rose like silent guards, where life moved slowly, and where opportunities were rare. Her family worked hard to provide the basics, but Ankita wanted more. She wanted to make her mark, to build something for herself and for those she loved. She believed education and work would be her way out, and she carried that belief with a quiet strength. When she heard about an opening at a luxury resort, it felt like the opportunity she had been waiting for. This was not just another job, it was a chance to step into a new world, one filled with possibilities that seemed endless. She felt a strange excitement as she packed her bags, not knowing that her decision would lead her into a place where dreams and nightmares would intertwine. The resort was unlike anything she had ever seen before. Nestled among the hills, with glass walls reflecting the sunlight and pathways lined with perfectly kept gardens, it gave the impression of peace and beauty. Wealthy guests arrived in expensive cars, dressed in designer clothes, carrying themselves with a confidence that only power and money could give. To Ankita, it was dazzling at first. She had imagined places like this when reading magazines or scrolling through images online, but seeing it with her own eyes made her heart race. She felt like she had entered another world, one she had long admired from a distance. But soon she would realize that the beauty of the resort was only a surface cover for something far less pure. Her first days on the job were filled with nervous energy. She wanted to prove herself, to show that she belonged in this place despite her modest background. The resort staff appeared professional and polite, but Ankita sensed an undercurrent of tension in the way they moved. Orders were carried out with precision, yet there was little warmth, as though everyone knew that stepping out of line would carry consequences. At the center of it all was Viraj Sen, the owner of the resort. He was a man who spoke softly, but carried an aura of authority that silenced those around him. He was wealthy, charismatic, and respected, but Ankita could not shake the feeling that there was something unreadable in his eyes. He welcomed her with a faint smile, but even in that moment, she felt a quiet warning hidden beneath his calm expression. Ankita threw herself into the work, eager to succeed. She managed bookings, attended to guests, and tried to learn the culture of this polished environment. At first, the job gave her pride, and she would write to her family about how wonderful everything looked. But behind the scenes, small details began to disturb her. There were certain rooms in the resort that were never booked openly, yet they were always occupied. She noticed that some guests arrived late at night without registering, slipping through side entrances while the staff turned away as if nothing unusual was happening. There were whispers among the employees, silenced quickly whenever someone noticed her listening. Though Ankita tried to ignore these signs, deep down she began to feel uneasy. The place that once appeared like a golden opportunity was slowly revealing cracks. The resort, with all its beauty, seemed to be hiding secrets. She could sense the tension in the way Mehul Vardhan, the manager, watched her movements. He was a man of few words, always carrying a stern expression, and though he treated her formally, there was a weight in his silence. Sometimes she felt as if she was being tested, as though her reactions to certain situations were being closely studied. Despite the unease, Ankita reminded herself of her goals. She told herself that every job had challenges and that she would adapt. She had no idea that the uneasiness she felt was not a passing discomfort but the first warning of the trap she was slowly walking into. The resort's beauty, its shining glass walls and its polished gardens, were only the surface. Beneath it there was a darkness that was waiting to swallow her. Ankita's dream of building a better life had brought her to this place, but little did she know, her dream was already colliding with forces far more dangerous than she could imagine. The path she had chosen was not leading to freedom, it was leading to the beginning of her nightmare. The days at the resort stretched on, each one carrying an invisible weight that pressed more heavily on Ankita's shoulders. At first, She believed the uneasiness she felt would pass, that it was only the nervousness of adapting to a new and unfamiliar environment. But the quiet pressure that surrounded her only grew stronger. What had once seemed like an opportunity was slowly turning into something darker, something she struggled to understand but could not ignore. The resort, with all its elegance and calm, held a silence that was not peaceful but heavy, as if everyone working there was carrying secrets they could never speak of. Mehul Vardhan, the manager, became a figure she could not escape. He was constantly present, appearing in corridors, in the lobby, near the reception, even when there was no reason for him to be there. His eyes followed her with an intensity that was unnerving. He rarely spoke, but his instructions always seemed designed to push her into uncomfortable situations. He would assign her to accompany certain guests, arrange their late-night needs, or guide them to places in the resort that were not part of her job description. Though nothing was said openly, Ankita could feel the weight of what was being expected from her. Every refusal, every hesitation seemed to draw silent disapproval, and though no threats were spoken, the air itself carried menace. Viraj Sen was a different kind of presence altogether. Unlike Mehul, who carried his control openly, Viraj's power came with subtlety. He was calm, polished, and always surrounded by an air of wealth and superiority. He had a way of smiling that felt both reassuring and dangerous. For the guests, he was the perfect host, a man who could charm them with ease, but for Ankita there was something unsettling beneath his demeanor. Whenever their paths crossed, she felt as though he was quietly observing, studying her reactions, measuring how much she could be bent before she broke. His words, though polite, carried hidden meanings, and his silence carried even more. Ankita's discomfort deepened when she began noticing patterns among the guests. Some of them never passed through the main entrance, but were brought in through side doors. Their names never appeared on any official register, yet rooms were prepared for them with extreme care. These guests demanded unusual services, often at odd hours of the night. Ankita was asked to deliver things that seemed ordinary at first, but carried undertones that made her uneasy. Expensive bottles of alcohol, packets wrapped in plain paper, trays with more than just. She sensed that her role was slowly being twisted into something she had never signed up for. Each time she tried to resist, Mehul would appear, reminding her of her duties in his cold, flat tone. There were no raised voices, no direct threats, but the way he looked at her left little doubt that she was being watched carefully. The other staff avoided her eyes, as though they knew exactly what was happening, but had long accepted it as part of the job. It was the silence of people who had already given up, who had decided survival was better than resistance. Ankita realized she was standing at a dangerous edge, where one wrong move could cost her more than just her job. Nights became the hard. The resort, which sparkled in the sunlight, turned into a place of shadows after dark. She would hear the sound of footsteps in empty hallways, muffled voices behind locked doors, and cars arriving when the world outside was asleep. She tried to convince herself not to think too much, to focus only on her assigned work, but her instincts kept telling her something was very wrong. Her heart grew heavier each day, as though her very presence in the resort was being tested. By now she had stopped writing to her family with excitement. Her letters and messages became shorter, less colorful. She did not want them to know what she was facing. A part of her still believed she could endure it, that she would find a way out before it was too late. But deep inside, she knew the resort was not just a workplace. It was a place where power played its cruelest games, where silence was demanded, and where her refusal to bend was already being noted. The pressure had begun to close in around her, silent yet suffocating, leaving her caught between her dreams and the fear of what resisting them might bring. Tara Elric had always been close to Ankita, and their friendship was built on honesty and loyalty. When Ankita joined the resort, Tara visited her whenever she could, eager to share in her excitement and see her succeed. At first, Tara admired the place too, with its shining halls, polished glass windows, and carefully designed gardens that gave the illusion of paradise. But as she spent more time there, she began to notice changes in her friend. Ankita's laughter became less frequent, her eyes seemed more cautious, and her smile appeared forced, as if it was a mask she had to wear. Tara's instinct told her that something was wrong, even though Ankita never openly admitted it. Tara observed carefully during her visits. She noticed the way Mehul Vardhan lingered around Ankita, his gaze following her even when she pretended not to notice. There was something unsettling about his presence, as though he was more than just a manager. He behaved like a gatekeeper, ensuring that nothing happened in the resort without his knowledge. Tara also saw how Ankita became uneasy whenever Viraj Sen entered the room. Viraj was admired by everyone for his charm and wealth, but Tara sensed something colder behind his carefully built image. He spoke softly and moved with confidence, but his silence carried weight. It was as though he was used to controlling everyone around him without ever raising his voice. The most disturbing discovery for Tara came when she noticed a pattern in the people who visited the resort. There were nights when expensive cars arrived quietly, their windows tinted, their number plates sometimes covered with dust or deliberately hidden. Men dressed in designer suits entered swiftly, never stopping at the reception. They were led through back doors, where staff greeted them with lowered eyes. These men were not tourists or casual travelers. Their movements were discreet, yet the staff treated them with an obedience that suggested they held far more power than they showed. Tara had never seen their names on guest lists or records. One evening, Tara stayed longer than usual and saw a figure she recognized from the news. It was Ravan Dastar, a politician whose influence stretched across the region. He was known for his strong connections and the respect he commanded, but what unsettled Tara was his secretive presence at the resort. He did not arrive with public attention or security, but quietly, as though his visit needed to be hidden. When Tara asked around casually, no one admitted to seeing him. The denial was too quick, too sharp, which only confirmed her suspicion. If a man of his stature came here in secrecy, then the resort was not just a place for leisure. It was a hub where dangerous deals and hidden arrangements were made behind closed doors. Tara started piecing things together in silence. She realized Ankita had been pushed into a web she could not escape. The strange assignments, the unspoken demands, and the constant observation were not random. Ankita was being tested, slowly pressured to play a role in something much darker. Tara wanted to confront her friend, but every time she looked into Ankita's eyes, she saw fear. It was the kind of fear that silenced words before they could be spoken. Ankita wanted to talk but could not, as though invisible chains bound her. As Tara left the resort on one of her visits, she felt the heaviness of what she had seen pressing against her chest. The beauty of the place had become meaningless. The glittering chandeliers and elegant pathways could not hide the shadows crawling within. The resort was not a dreamlike escape, but a carefully constructed mask hiding secrets that powerful men wanted buried. Tara realized she was standing too close to a dangerous truth. Ankita's silence was not because she wanted to protect herself, but because she was protecting those she loved from the storm she knew was coming. The hidden connection was clear now. Viraj Sen and Mehul Vardhan controlled the resort with strict silence, but the real force behind it all was the powerful hands of men like Ravan Dastar. Tara understood that Ankita's life was in greater danger than she imagined. The resort was not only a workplace, it was a trap set in plain sight, and Ankita had already been caught in its web. The night Ankita disappeared began like any other, but the air around the resort felt heavier than usual. The hills were wrapped in silence, broken only by the faint hum of crickets and the distant rush of the river. Ankita had worked through the day with the same quiet determination she always carried, moving between tasks while keeping her unease hidden behind a polite smile. But something in her movements seemed different, as if she was carrying the weight of a decision. She had confided in no one, yet her friend Tara sensed earlier that day that Ankita had reached a breaking point. Her silences had grown longer, and her eyes seemed to hold a storm she could no longer contain. By late evening, the resort had settled into its strange rhythm of secrecy. Guests came and went discreetly, doors shut quietly, and the staff moved with the same cautious obedience as always. Ankita was last seen walking toward the edge of the property, close to the pathway that led to the riverbank. The surveillance cameras, which were said to cover every corner of the resort, mysteriously went dark for an entire hour. No one could explain why. Some said it was a technical glitch, others whispered that it had been done on purpose. But what remained undeniable was that during that gap, Ankita vanished. When staff were questioned, they gave conflicting accounts. Some claimed she had spoken about leaving the resort for a while, suggesting she wanted to go home. Others insisted she had never mentioned leaving at all. Her belongings, however, remained untouched in her room. Her clothes, her phone charger, even the book she had been reading were left neatly in place. It was clear she had not left willingly. Tara, upon hearing the news, rushed to the resort, her heart pounding with fear. She knew Ankita too well to believe the story that she had simply decided to leave overnight. Something had happened, and the silence around the staff told Tara that they already knew more than they dared to admit. That same night, villagers living near the river reported strange activity. A dark vehicle was parked at the edge of the forest, its headlights turned off. Several figures were seen moving quickly, carrying what appeared to be a heavy object wrapped in fabric. The villagers, afraid to interfere, watched from a distance. By morning the vehicle was gone, leaving only tire marks in the mud. Rumors spread quietly, but no one dared to speak openly. The resort was too powerful, and the people involved were not the kind one could accuse without facing consequence. When Tara tried to press for answers, she was met with closed doors. Viraj Sen remained calm, dismissing the disappearance as a personal choice Ankita had made. Mehul Vardhan maintained his usual cold silence, claiming he knew nothing. Their indifference only deepened Tara's suspicion that they were not just aware of what had happened, but directly involved. The more she pushed, the more resistance she faced, as though every path to the truth was being blocked deliberately. Days passed with no sign of Ankita. Authorities were slow to act, their investigations half-hearted, and filled with excuses. The power of Ravan Dastar loomed over everything, ensuring that no one probed too deeply. Tara felt helpless, yet she refused to give up. She began retracing Ankita's final steps, speaking to villagers quietly, piecing together the fragments of what they had seen. The stories were all the same: a car by the river, movements in the dark, and the silence that followed. The absence of Ankita became a haunting presence in itself. Her room at the resort stood untouched, a quiet reminder of the dreams she once carried. Tara found herself walking past it, her chest tightening each time she saw the door closed, as if her friend might still be inside, waiting. But the truth was slowly becoming impossible to deny. Ankita had not vanished by choice. She had been taken, silenced by the very people who had promised her a future. The night of her disappearance was not an accident, nor was it random. It was calculated, planned with precision, carried out under the cover of secrecy that the resort had mastered so well. For those who controlled the place, Ankita had become a problem. Her resistance, her refusal to bend, had made her dangerous. And in a world where power thrived on silence, she had spoken too loudly, even without words. The river carried her absence in its currents, and the hills whispered of the night when one young woman's fight against shadows ended in silence. Days later, the silence surrounding Ankita's disappearance was shattered when her body was discovered in the river. It was a moment that froze the air in the valley, a moment where the truth, no matter how deeply hidden, broke through the carefully built walls of lies. The current had carried her, but the marks on her body spoke of a struggle, of resistance that had ended in cruelty. For Tara, the discovery was both devastating and clarifying. The hope that her friend might still return alive was gone, but now there was no denying what had happened. Ankita had been silenced because she refused to become part of the hidden world the resort was running. The news spread quickly, but with it came a wave of confusion and fear. Official reports were muted, carefully worded to avoid implicating the powerful. Some spoke of suicide, others suggested an accident, but the villagers and those who knew Ankita could see the truth behind the masks. She had been targeted, punished for her refusal to give in. The authorities, under the shadow of political pressure, moved slowly, as though their every step was being guided by unseen hands. Files went missing, witnesses changed their statements, and those who spoke too boldly found themselves silenced with warning. The reality of Ankita's case was being buried, even before it could fully surface. Tara, however, refused to let her friend's story fade into silence. She began gathering every piece of information she could, connecting the dots between Ankita's final days and the figures who had surrounded her. Viraj Sen's calm composure now looked like the face of manipulation, a man who used charm to cover cruelty. Mehul Vardhan's silence was no longer the silence of discipline, but the silence of someone complicit, someone who carried out the tasks no one else wanted to dirty their hands with. And above them all loomed the shadow of Ravan Dastar, the powerful politician, who ensured that nothing touched those beneath him. It was his quiet visits to the resort, his secret presence, that explained why so many doors remained closed, why the truth was constantly hidden. As Tara dug deeper, she realized that Ankita's murder was not just a personal tragedy, but a reflection of how power worked in silence. Young women like her friend became easy targets in places where influence and money dictated the rule. The resort was never a sanctuary of peace or luxury. It was a stage for secret dealings, for indulgences that could never see the light of day. Ankita had seen too much, and in refusing to bend, she had exposed herself to the wrath of those who thrived on control. Her courage had cost her everything. For the world outside, the story was reshaped into something less threatening. Reports were altered, narratives rewritten and the truth drowned under a flood of speculation and distraction. But Tara carried the weight of the real story in her heart. She knew what had happened, she had seen the signs, and though she could not fight the power directly, she made a vow to keep Ankita's memory alive. She began writing, documenting every detail, every whisper, every observation, hoping that someday someone with enough courage and influence would bring the truth into the open. The reality of Ankita's case was never about a single night or a single act of violence. It was about the system that allowed it to happen, the silence that followed, and the shadows that protected the guilty. For many, her story ended with her body being pulled from the river, but for Tara it became a haunting reminder of how dangerous it is to dream in a world where greed and power decide who gets to live freely. Ankita's voice had been stolen, but her courage lingered, echoing through every hidden corner of the resort, through the hills and river that had witnessed her final moments. The truth was never fully told, never officially admitted, but it lived in the spaces between silence. The story of Ankita Bhandari was not just about a young woman lost. It was about the darkness that thrives when no one dares to speak. And though the world moved on, the reality remained. Her death was not an accident of fate, but the calculated end of a girl who dared to resist the weight of power.